All right. So, good evening, everyone. And for this evening, I would like to share on this topic of the family. And it's a very general topic, but I think that it's a very important topic for us to think about in our own lives, as well as in the lives of our faith communities that we are leading or that we come from. And it is the topic about raising good Christian families. Raising good Christian families. So let me begin by making a little comment about family. Why is the family so important as far as the Catholic Church is concerned? You will notice, if you have been a Catholic for a few years, that the church gives a lot of primacy to this idea of the family. And the reason really is that the family is the cradle of civilization. All right. The whole of human civilization is actually carried, sustained, upheld, supported by the institution of the family. The society actually is made up of many institutions, right? You have governments, you have different civil organizations in society. You have all sorts of different institutions that function in society. But when you distill society of all these institutions, the one institution that you cannot get rid of from society is the institution of the family, because every individual who is a member of human society actually comes from a family. So when you don't have a family, or when you don't have the family as an institution, you basically do not have society. So that's why we say that society, or the family rather, is the cradle of civilization. The family is the most basic unit of society. In fact, the family is so important because when a baby is born, or even rather even from before the time a baby is born, this baby actually begins to learn from the family how to be human. But more so, after this baby is born, the baby begins growing up in the midst of a family consisting of other human beings, primarily his or her parents, and then his or her siblings, and relatives. So from different distances, this baby actually grows up learning from these other human beings in the family how himself or herself to be human. And so we can say that the family is an incubation of one's future. Just like the baby or the fetus in the mother's womb, the womb is an incubation for the growth and the eventual birth of this baby. When this child is born, the baby is born into a family and is supposed to enjoy the right or the privilege of being protected and raised in this family. So this family becomes the incubation for this baby, an incubation for the development and the growth of this baby into a child, into a teenager, subsequently into a young adult. At which time this child is expected to now begin to enter into human society as a responsible member. So the family becomes that incubation of the future of this child. And throughout this time of incubation, the environment that is provided by the family for this child to live in, and the relationships that this child enjoys or experiences in this environment or in this family will shape the life of this child. And it shapes the life of this child in many different aspects, right? Faith is primary, and then there are the values with which this child grows up, values that are used to shape and mold this child's understanding, and then the worldview that is communicated or imparted to the child under the tutelage or the coaching of this child's parents and elder siblings. So all these things take place in the life of the family. And how well a society does really depends on how well the family does in that society. All right. So a good society will find that it is good because it has families that are good. All right. But of course, the relationship works the other way around as well. Families will find it easier more possible to be good when society is good. So there is a kind of a symbiotic relationship going on between the wider society as well as the family. But whatever it is, when you water society down to its very basic level, the most basic unit of society is the family. And in order for us to raise good Christian families, I always say that there are three conversations, three dialogues that must take place in the family. Three conversations. What are these three conversations? The first conversation is a conversation or a dialogue that takes place among the family members. A dialogue that means a communication that goes in different directions among the different members of the family. All right, they must be talking to one another. They must be communicating with one another. Now, when I talk about communicating with one another, I don't just mean about saying nice things to one another. All right, but there must be a conversation, an exchange of ideas, a communication of values. What kind of values are we talking about? Well, values that are in service of truth, values that are in service of goodness, values that are in service of beauty. All right. And therefore, especially on the part of parents, parents need to teach truth to their children all the time. Parents need to cultivate conversations with their children to help their children to understand what is good in life and what is bad, what contradicts good, and how they should be always striving towards the good. Therefore, when I say that we are supposed to have conversations in our family, I don't just mean being nice to one another, saying nice and loving things to one another, but I mean saying things that will help one another in the family to optimize our personhood, things that will teach our younger children in the family how to be good people, and parents have that great power to raise their children up to believe what goodness is. Parents have the power to shape the minds of their children so that the children will be able to understand what truth and goodness are. All right. But the contradicting idea is also true, that parents also have the power to raise their children up to believe lies as truth. And I have seen that before in certain families where their parents teach children wrong values, like you can live your moral life anyhow you want. Even if you're a bad person out there and people reject you for being bad, it's okay because we are your family. We will always be here for you. We will always accept you as you are. And what's more important than all this goodness or this morality that people expect from you or that society expects from you? What's more important than that is the fact that when you need to run away from society, you can always run back to your family because we will give you unconditional love no matter how you choose to behave. I've seen parents who raise their children up with that kind of an idea, but that idea is a lie. But their children actually grow up believing that to be true because the parents, instead of raising the children up to understand and to strive for truth, to strive for moral goodness, to strive for goodness and beauty in their lives in terms of virtue, the parents taught them family trumps everything else. Family trumps even morality. So it doesn't matter how you live your life, whatever it is, your family will always be here to support you. Your family must always be here to support even immoral choices that you make. You see? So I have seen that happening before. And that's not the conversation that I'm talking about. When I say that there must be proper dialogue and conversation taking place among family members, what I mean is that the dialogue and the conversation that takes place must be one that is in service of truth, in service of goodness, and in service of beauty. It's not just about saying nice things to one another. And therefore, this dialogue must include the element of disciplining one another. It must include that. It must include parents disciplining their children and even spouses disciplining one another. Gently, yes, but nevertheless disciplining one another, because that is important. That is very much a part of our dialogue. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020, my family members, a couple of them, sat me down. The community that I lived with sat me down, and they spoke to me about the state of my health. And they told me, look, your health is not good. And yes, all these years you have had this bad health because you've not had a chance to take care of your health, because you've been busy traveling, serving the church, and you've been busy doing lots of things. You had no time to think of yourself. But now is time. It's the pandemic. You're not able to go anywhere. We are on lockdown, and we don't know how long this is going to last, but at least it's going to last for a few months. And so this is the chance that God is giving you to start taking care of your health. And therefore, we want to ask you whether you are willing to subject yourself to a regimen of physical exercise every other day. And that was a conversation that took place. And because I grew up with a lot of fear of exercise, a lot of fear of physical movement, so I had to voice my fears. I had an opportunity to express how difficult it was for me to want to exercise, but because of the daily conversations I had about it, the daily dialogues that I had with my family about it. And so this actually strengthened me. It gave me the willpower to exercise. And really, it helped my health. Not only that I lost a lot of weight, of course, I'm still fat. I don't think I will ever be thin, so I'll always be round, fluffy, and cute, but I'm much more healthy now than I used to be. Why? Because my family decided to discipline me, with a lot of gentleness, because they knew that I had issues with physical movement and exercise. I have a very difficult background in doing physical exercise. So it has never been something that I enjoyed doing. It's always been torturous for me. But because of the dialogues, that they had with me, the support that they gave to me, which is part of conversations, which is part of dialogue, the support that I got. So that helped me to persist in my regimen of exercise. And because of that, my health has become much, much better than it was. I used to be taking medication for hypertension, high blood pressure. Now my blood pressure is so low, I don't even have to take medication anymore. And I used to have quite a reasonably heavy dose of medication for diabetes. But now I'm taking quite a low dose because my blood sugar level has reduced a lot as a result of my frequent exercise and my weight loss. You see, so I'm much more healthy now. And how did this come about? It came about as a result of dialogue, conversations taking place among family members, by inspiring one another, encouraging one another, spurring one another to always strive for what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. I remember that my family members told me, when they were trying to persuade me to accept this regimen of exercise, my family members told me, if you really love people and you want to serve God and you want to serve the church, then part of giving your best is also by keeping yourself as healthy as you can. And it made good sense to me. That dialogue helped me to realize that, you see. So this is the benefit of dialogue. It's the benefit of conversations that take place among family members, and as I said, it's not just about saying nice things. It's also about saying things that we don't like to hear, and very often, of course, who likes to be disciplined, right? Who likes to be told that you are failing in this area and you have to buck up and we will be here to help you? Who likes to be told that, right? But part of our dialogue among family members includes this element of disciplining one another, helping one another to optimize our personhood and to be at our best, you see. So it's not just about saying nice things, pleasant things that people like to hear. No, all right? Dialogue among family members is much more than that. Now, the second dialogue or the second conversation that is necessary in developing good and healthy Christian families is the dialogue or the conversation with God, the dialogue or the conversation between the family as well as God. Now, we need to be very clear about this, that as human beings, we are created not just as physical beings, but also spiritual beings. It is intrinsically what it means to be human. Therefore, spirituality, the fact that we are spirit, is a part of our humanity. And it is because that part of us is also spirit. This is why we can relate with God, because God is spirit. And those who worship God must worship him in spirit and in truth. And it is God who is our creator and our originator. And therefore, we as human beings, made up of body as well as spirit, have to relate with God, our creator and our originator. And this relationship that we have with God as individuals as well as families must be very strongly cultivated in the scheme of our family life. All right. Very few families in the modern society today prioritize spiritual values in their life, right? But part of what it means to be a Christian family is to prioritize eternal values in our life, eternal values, spiritual values. Many families actually have wrong values, right? And I've given an example earlier on in my first point about the dialogue among family members, right? There are parents who actually communicate wrong values to their children, all right? And many families have all sorts of wrong values. Like, for example, without even saying it, many modern parents have expectations, academic and professional expectations of their children. And somehow, through their bodily language and through the priorities that they impose on their children, they communicate the idea to their children that their spiritual values take second place. And that more important than their spiritual values is what? Is their success, their professional success in life, the future that they have as professionals and the future that they can have in wealth building. All right. We may not say it as such to our children, but what we say to them and how we say it to them and the kind of priorities that we make them place on, say, their studies or their professional development tells them a lot. All right. And very often, many parents are willing to neglect the spiritual aspects, right? When the exams are coming, we want our children to go for an overdrive of tuition lessons, all right? And to the extent that it's okay if they don't go to church for mass. It's okay if they don't go for catechetical lessons. It's okay if they neglect to pray just for a while because exams are coming. So for this season, you place a priority on your exam and let God and things of the faith take second place. Well, when we neglect the spiritual element of life like this, we will eventually reap what we sow. We cannot run away from this. All right. And so many families, without even saying it, they actually are cultivating the wrong values, communicating the wrong values to their children. They might say, but we didn't tell our children that church is not important. We didn't tell our children that prayer is not important. Well, the fact that we keep on emphasizing the academic performance, but not emphasize the importance of their life of prayer, not emphasize their participation in the Eucharistic sacrifice in the church, already says it all. Sometimes it's not in what we say, but it's in what we don't say. All right. And when we neglect the spiritual aspects of our family life, we will reap what we sow. We will see it in the lives of our children when they grow up. Therefore, it is important in a family to cultivate this constant discipline of having a relationship with God, having conversations with God, a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue with God as part of our routine. All right. Have your spiritual disciplines in your family in place. Make sure that we have morning prayer when we wake up. Okay. If you have young children, get your young children to say certain morning prayers when they wake up in the morning before they go to school. It may be difficult sometimes. On certain days you will see that they might react because they are not in a mood to do so. But when they see that their parents are consistent in prayer, they themselves, as they grow up, will also embrace this consistency, and it will not become so difficult anymore as time gets by. All right. In the evenings, have a short session of prayer together. Pray the evening prayer together. or pray even just one decade of the rosary together. It doesn't take very long, but it is a very good time for us to sit down and to just spend that 5, 10, 15 minutes focusing on God and having a dialogue with God, to thank God for the day, to thank God for the blessings that we have enjoyed for the day, to pray for people who need our prayers, to not forget other people outside of our families, to pray for them. After all, the family is a component of the wider human society. So spend time to pray for the world, to pray for the church, you see. So when we have all these spiritual disciplines in place and we constantly cultivate them in the family, you will also reap what you sow. You will see your children growing up to be people of prayer because they have grown up with parents who have cultivated prayer as an important part of their lives. As families, we cannot afford to not have our spiritual priorities in place. I have a son, many of you know that, who is now 11 years old, 11 plus, and I always tell him that his academic performance is important in the sense that it's his obligation as a student. Therefore, he must always do his best and give his best. But is it the most important thing for me as his father that he must be the best in class? No. Is it the most important thing for me as his father that he must be in the best class in school? No. Is it the most important thing for me as his father that one day he must grow up to be a respectable professional? No. I always tell him, all these things are good. And daddy always wants you to give your best in your studies because that's the obligation that God has given to you now in your life. That's your vocation for now. So give your best in your studies. But all I ask is your best. There are things that are more important in your life than your studies. And I've always told my son that from the time he was young, and he remembers this, and I always tell him that more important than your studies is your relationship with God and the importance of being a good person. Being good is more important than being smart. Being good is more important than being successful, And so today, when you ask my son this question, he is very clear about the answer. What is more important than your studies? Being good. Does that mean that your studies are unimportant? No, they are important because that's your obligation for the moment. All right. It's not an issue of success. It's an issue of accountability and responsibility given to us by God. And therefore, you have to put in your best. But are there more important things than that? Yes. God and goodness in life, living a good life, being a good person. And therefore, for me, one day, if my son doesn't actually become a professional, if after giving his best to his studies, his calling is not to be a professional, but to be something else, maybe to be, say, a gardener in somebody's garden, in a rich man's garden, or to be a gardener maybe in the church compound. Is that okay? Yes, it is okay. It is perfectly fine for me as his father, or to be a zookeeper. Is it okay? Yes, it's perfectly fine for me as his father, as long as that is the vocation that God has given to him. What's more important to me is that as he does these things, he must be a prayerful person and he must be a good person. And I always said this to him, that even if your vocation is to occupy the lower stations in life, if you are a holy man, Daddy will be proud of you. Daddy will be very proud of you. I will never compare you with someone else and ask, why did your friend become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, but you only became this? I will never compare. If you are good, you love God, and you do whatever work you are called to do with a love for God and love for people, Daddy will be the proudest father, and that's what I always assure him. And therefore, you do your best, always trying to love God and love people to the best of your ability. You see, so we must have our spiritual priorities in place. We must have a constant conversation and dialogue with God, because that will shape our whole understanding of life, and our children's understanding, which is very important. So have our spiritual priorities in place in our family. Make sure there is this constant and ongoing dialogue with God. All right. Parents, it is your responsibility to study the Christian faith, the Catholic faith, and to teach this faith to your children. This is not the job of anyone else, but the job of parents. Parents are primarily responsible for communicating the faith to the children. All right? Don't subcontract this job to someone else. Don't think that this is the job of the priest or it's the job of the catechist in the parish. All right? What the priest does in terms of teaching the faith is supplementary to what you are supposed to have done. What the catechist does in the parish is meant to be supplementary to what you as parents are supposed to have done at home. If you have not done anything to study the faith as part of your own discipline and then to teach this faith to your children, there is no amount of teaching that the priests, the deacons, the religious, and the catechists can do that will make up for what you do not do. So don't subcontract this role to other people. And if you don't take on this role as the primary witness of the faith and the primary teacher of the faith to your children, guess what? Somebody else will do it. Somebody else will do it through Facebook, through YouTube, and through some other channel or some other online interface. And somebody else whom you do not know will communicate some falsehood, some error to your children, some very fundamental error to your children that you do not correct through your teachings of faith, and you will not like the result of it. All right. Therefore, I'm stating this very strongly because part of our dialogue with God is about learning about God and teaching our children about God as well. All right. And if we don't do it, somebody else is going to teach their view about God, or somebody else is going to teach your children that God doesn't exist, and therefore your children can live their lives as if God doesn't exist. And you will not like the outcome. Therefore, parents, we have to be very careful with what we are doing with our children in terms of their faith. Don't subcontract this to the parish or to the church, because it is your sacred role as parents to fulfill this role. Okay, so the two conversations and the two dialogues that I've covered so far are conversations or dialogue among family members within the family. Secondly, conversations between the members of the family with God, or the family as a whole with God. Remember that these two are very crucial aspects of how we are to nurture our families as Christian parents. Okay, the third dialogue or the third conversation is a dialogue between the family and the world outside there. The world, as we know it, is increasingly messed up. It is a world that's getting more and more chaotic. I'm sure you just need to go and read the news each morning to see how messy things are getting, right? There is never one time or one moment when the world is in absolute peace, right? And the world now, compared to 20 years ago, compared to 50 years ago, it's getting worse. And so there is this onslaught of evil that's taking place in the world that also affects the family, all right? And what's happening in this world now, one of the worst things that we are seeing happening in the world today is how faith is dying in many civilizations. Faith is dying in many civilizations. Civilizations that used to believe in God, that used to worship God, civilizations that used to call themselves Christian, have now become atheistic civilizations. They don't believe in the existence of God anymore, and they live and rule their societies as if God does not exist. But when you take faith away from society, it will be replaced with ideology. And so you see a lot of Western society today is governed by ideology instead of faith. Faith is a belief in God. Ideology is a belief and a trust in an idea that may not necessarily have God as its foundation, you see. And that is a very good formula to mess society up. And this is one of the things that the devil is doing. The devil is causing societies to replace faith with ideology. And it is also because of this that you see around the world today, if you discern the pattern of human society, you will realize that demonic activity is on the rise in societies. So there is a spiritual battle going on today between ideology and faith. All right. On the one hand, there are people who want to believe in God and remain faithful to their relationship with God. On the other hand, there are people who say God is not important. Ideology, our idea, and our opinions about things are more important. So there is this clash of these two these two views or these two approaches to life that you see in society. And guess what? Our children, even though they may be in our country where people generally have a faith and have a religion, our children are not immune to what's happening overseas, outside of our own culture. All right, a lot of YouTube videos today, a lot of posts on Instagram, on Facebook, a lot of write-ups, articles on the internet. These are all produced by people who are steeped in a certain kind of ideology that contradict the Christian faith. Do our children consume these ideas? Of course they do, and you can't actually insulate them from it. You can't insulate your children from watching Facebook, from accessing Facebook, right? Or from watching YouTube videos. At some point, they will be exposed to these things. All right. So we cannot say that just because our children grow up in an environment of faith, therefore they are immune to the influence of ideology. Ideology is everywhere, and ideology can be evil. So what do we do as parents, knowing that our children are immersed in the modern culture of ideology? Well, we help them to dialogue with the world. We highlight to them the ideologies that are happening, that are being proliferated out there. We highlight to them the ideologies that are being spread wide around the world through social media and through all forms of media. We talk to them about it. We dialogue about this in our family, and we also dialogue with this about this with God. And we help our children to understand, to read the world, to read what's going on, and we help them to interpret these things, and we talk to them about these issues. Okay, so as your children grow up and they learn to think, don't just teach them to pray, but also teach them how to think about politics, about war, about the economy, and teach them, coach them how to think about these issues with a Christian mind, with a Christian mindset, with a Christian worldview, and how to use their lives to respond to these issues in a Christian way. Talk about them. Like I said, my son is only 11 years old, but I do talk to him about the economy, about politics. I also talk to him about the war, the current war that's taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and the role of all these Western nations in this whole affair. I help him to think about it, and I also share my thoughts with him about it. You see, so you might think, as an 11-year-old, how can he possibly process this? Well, he can process it at his level with a lot of guidance, but this war is taking place in a world that my son belongs to as well. And therefore he needs to learn how to think about it. And if I don't help him to think about it in the right way, one day someone else will help him to think about it. And I may not like what this person is saying to my son about whatever's happening in the world. So I should take the role of a father to be the educator, the spiritual educator, as well as the formator who forms the worldview of my son. All right. We will never be able to undertake any of these dialogues perfectly, but it has to be something that is intentional. It has to be something that we work very hard to do. Okay, so the three dialogues, a dialogue among family members, a dialogue with God, and dialogue with the world. Make sure that as a family, we are communicating, dialoguing, and having conversations about these aspects of our lives together. Don't spend your time pressurizing your children, nagging at them, antagonizing them to meet certain expectations that you have in terms of their performance. That is the surest way to get your children to shut off and not want to talk to you about anything. And when they stop seeing you as the main tutors of their life, they will be looking elsewhere for other people to tutor them and to coach them. And you will not like the result. And many children have shut off from their parents precisely because their parents have done this to them. And I do pray as a parent myself that I myself will not be doing this to my son anytime. But we need to always be in conversation with our children to help them to think, to help them to share, to express their thoughts, while guiding them on what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful, teaching them also to talk about these things to God. All right. So that's what we call a healthy Christian family dynamic. Okay. It takes intentionality. It takes effort. It's not something that will happen by accident. All right. So don't expect a happy accident. Don't expect to leave things alone and then one day by accident things will turn out well. Your children will turn out spiritually strong, even though you don't do anything about the state of their spirituality. Don't expect that happy accidents like that will happen, because the world that we live in today is a world that's heightened with diabolical, evil activity, demonic activity. Therefore, the odds are actually stacked against us. And if we don't fight for the lives and the salvation and the goodness of our children, we are guaranteed to lose. Get these aspects of our lives as a family right. Don't make it the job of the government or even the church to form the life of your children, because primarily this role of forming the life of our children belongs to parents. It's the job of parents. The church is here to help, to supplement, to give the sacraments. The catechists are there to help, to supplement what you are already supposed to do as parents. And more than half the time, the government is not helping. The governments generally will help us to become more materialistic, and to want to do things in service of the economy. They want us to form the children in the image of the economy. It's all about the money as far as the government is concerned. So don't depend on the government to communicate or to impart godly values to your children. It doesn't work that way. The world does not work that way. All right, you can vote anyone into the government, but you will get the same kind of leader, because by the sheer fact of the government being the government, the economy very often is their main goal, not the morality of your children. So you are responsible for the morality, the faith, and the goodness of your children. Remember, every good priest that we have in the church, every good bishop that we have in the church, every good pope that we have in the church is in some way a product of his family. If you think about it, right? All our priests, our bishops, our popes, our deacons like me, we come from families. And the fact that we could have become who we are today is in some way contributed by the families that we were incubated in. In the same way, many times parishioners like to complain about their priests, complain about their bishops, and complain about the deacons as well. Because yes, it's true that there are clergy who have anger issues. There are clergy who have abuse issues. There are clergy who have control issues. Well, where do you think all that started from? Chances are, if you got to know their families, you will realize that it began in the environment of their family where they grew up. In the same way, we also have clergy who are very spiritual, very hardworking, very conscientious about their vocation. Where did these values come from? Chances are, if you study their families, you will see that it all came because of the upbringing that they experienced in their families. You want good priests, you want good bishops, you want good popes, you want good deacons, you want good religious. We must raise good families. Where there are good lay people, you will have good clergy and good religious. In a way, the clergy and the religious that we have are a reflection of us and how we are raising our families. If you find that the clergy that you have are not good, it simply means that our families are not healthy. If our families in the church are healthy, we will be producing good vocations for the church. So maybe it's time for us to stop complaining and to start examining our families, how we have raised our children, and what kind of clergy we are producing for the church. And so I cannot emphasize enough that it is important for us to prioritize the family in our Catholic life and in our Christian life. Raise good Christian families, and that will solve a big part of the problems that society is facing today. We are very much fighting a losing battle, not because it's a battle that cannot be won, but because many people are not trying hard enough. Many people are not trying in the right way. Many Catholics, many Christians are just going right with the flow of society. They go for mass on Sundays. Some will go for their small cell groups and their basic communities. Some will go for their pious devotions. But when it comes to values and the way they regulate the lives of their families, they are disconnected from the life of the church and from the teachings of the church. They are disconnected from their roles as parents over their families. You see, as spiritual leaders of their families, they are disconnected. And so there is a call now for us to return to this vocation of families, of parenthood, for us to once again be leaders and to lead our families spiritually so that we will have a Christian mind and be able to respond to the world, be able to have a healthy relationship with God, and be responsible witnesses of the gospel in this world. That is the importance of raising good Christian families. So let us ask for the intercessions of our Blessed Mother, as well as all the saints, asking for them to pray for us as they also accompany us in this journey of raising our families. May God bless us all as we reflect on this issue.